So hey guys, I'm interested in seeing the remake of Animal Farm coming out on May 1st. For those wondering, it's April 5th today, Sunday. So I'm interested in seeing this movie. I saw the trailer of it. It's getting a lot of backlash. No, I don't know anything about the directors. I don't know anything about the writers. I know some of the cast members in it, but it's got a lot of backlash. But I have an idea about it. People do not go to watch Animal Farm for animals. I mean, let's be honest. They're conveying a message. It's always been about conveying a message. So that's why I'm interested in this. Now, I know a little bit about Angel Studios. I watched The Chosen, they're a distributor of movies. So there's The Chosen. There was that spy movie they distributed. I was interested in seeing that, but I just can't get down. I'm not gonna go into detail about this soon. I don't want to get too deep into that, but typically what Angel Studios does is they do historical what the what word am I looking for? Historical non-fictional things. So I remember when it's called, I believe it's pronounced Bowheffer. Let's go into Atlas because that's what I have it here for. It was Bonhoeffer. I believe that's how you pronounce it. So, uh, so this guy was a pastor. He was also kind of a spy. I didn't know anything about him. I never heard of this guy before I saw the trailer for that movie when I was in a theater before watching another movie. So he was a pastor, anti-Nazi dissident, who was a key founding member of the Confessing Church, the Synod. His writings on Christianity role in the Sacred World had become really influential. Now, at the time I saw this, I was like, I can't really piece who this person is. I can't tell if they're fictional or if they're not fictional. And I don't like that. And that's... It couldn't tempt me over to see the movie. I couldn't make any sense of this guy. I heard what it was... I mean, I know what it was trying to portray, but I couldn't get a sense of who he was. And I'll tell you something. This is what was going on before. I do not typically like movies that talk about Hitler. Not in the reasons why you would think. I don't like movies about Hitler. Any literary works, anything regarding Hitler, because typically what happens is there's a story around who Hitler is, and there's always this thing, and it's just not my kind of thing. It's like Hitler becomes this person that everyone hates, and all this stuff that he has done, and all this, and people just feed off of that. I don't like that. I'll tell you a story. I believe I may have told this story before in a video. When it comes to Hitler, I knew who Hitler was in college, before college, but I didn't know who Stalin was. And I remember specifically, we had to do a writing. We were told that we had to do an essay on this book about this woman's perspective of Hitler during German time. I think it was a. I don't think it. I think it. I can't remember. I think it might have been a it was like a based on their interpretation of an interpretation, and we had to make an interpretation of that, and we had to write a book report or essay, whatever it was, on this book, and I I I wasn't interested in doing that. I mean, the book wasn't even interesting to me. But outside of that, I knew about Hitler. I didn't know who Stalin was. That was the first time hearing about who Stalin was in college. So like, who's this guy? I heard about Russia and all that, but I didn't know who Stalin was. So I was like, and what tipped me off was we were going through World War II and all the information about that, and I was looking at the information about the army of Stalin and Germany and everybody, and we had this graph, we had this chart that said all the numbers of people who were there and all the people who died in the army, and I noticed that for some reason Stalin's army had the largest losses of any of them combined. I was like, what is this? I mean, it don't make sense. How are you having all these losses? I was like, this doesn't add up. Like, they were, I think it was, I mean, you know, if you know the Russian war, you know it. But when you compare it to everyone else, Russia had the highest, well, Soviet Union had the highest losses of them all. And I was like, what's the story behind this? There was no story. There was nothing else. It was just giving up numbers. I was like, I don't know. I don't have a lot of context to go off of. But it looks like Stalin may be as bad, if not worse, than Hitler. And I could just tell by the numbers, what the numbers were saying. I was like, something don't add up here. So I was like, I'm not doing this Hitler thing. I don't know what's going on, but I don't think that this is the full story. And I was like, I'm not writing about Hitler. So I had a 4.0 GPA. I could take an F. But, yeah, so I took the F, and GPA dropped to like, what, 3.5? Big deal to me, you know? Now, it did cause me to get another F in one of my, she was my favorite professor. She was my favorite professor. And I was probably her favorite student. But I couldn't attend. I mean, it was just messing with my mind. And I was just like, I can't. I just can't. So, yeah, so that's how I got my first Fs. I didn't get no B. I didn't get no B, D, C before that, but I just got 2 Fs from being a straight A student. I was like, you know, whatever. So this guy, reading what they've said, criticized them on this movie. I don't know. It doesn't sell on me. So Angel Studios did distribute this movie. Yeah, it's a deadly plot to assassinate Hitler. A historical drama film. It was produced by Angel Studios. So this one is produced by Angel Studios. Again, they do a lot of historical stuff. Even if it's get to know the person, but I as far as the person go, I could not get into, and like I said, I'm very cautious about getting into anything involving Hitler. We can talk about the Berlin Wall. We can talk about Germany, Nazi Germany, but when you start talking about Hitler, there's gonna be like some narrative or something about it where 9 times out of 10 it's gonna be something anti-Hitler, and it's just gonna be like, well, of course, someone could make that argument. But anyways, like I said, you know. So they got this new one, Animal Farm, which is what this movie's. I talked way too much about that. Anyways, Animal Farm. Like I said, I don't know anything about the writers. I don't know anything about the director. I know the cast. So let's read what it says. An animated film adaptation of George Orwell's Animal Farm, directed by Andy Serkis. I don't know. I can tell you right now that's not um um what's the word? Not a regional English language. It's that's a foreign name. I don't know. I'm not gonna look into it. Try to be unbiased, but I have an idea about Angel Form, and we're gonna get into this. It's scheduled for theatrical release on May 1st, 2026. Distributed by Angel Studios, this satirical retelling features voice acting from the Seth Rogen, Roddy. I'm not going to go through the names, but anyways, so the production was the Imaginarium, animated drama satire. Plot: the film follows the classic story of farm animals rebelling against human owners, only to have their equality-focused movement turn into a dictatorship. The film, which was formerly in development at Netflix before being acquired by Angel Studios, has been described by some critics as a unique, potentially more family-friendly, yet still satirical take compared to previous adaptations. Here's where I have the problem with that. The word satirical. If you know Animal Farm, it sounds to... I know that people have said that this is a woke version of Animal Farm, but satirical is ironically satirical in this context, because if it's woke and it knows that it's woke, then you could sell that to a wider audience for saying it's satirical. It's not meant to be something that is, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Satirical. You're trying to play on the fact that people say it's woke and all this, and just say, oh, this is just satire. This is not the original. I have a feeling it's deeper than that. So this says 2025. This is 2026. I know it's coming out on May 1st. I just saw the... I didn't see a trailer of it when I went to movies yesterday. What was the day before? I think... No, it was yesterday. I didn't see the trailer yesterday. But I did see it some previous time. But yeah, conservatives are like, this is not the original version. Here's the problem with the conservative mindset. People have said that this was anti-communist movie or book, but in reality, philosophically speaking, if something is anti, then equally it would be pro. It's depending on your interpretation. And from what I've seen, from the movie that I saw, the first one, the cartoon one, that would be pro-communism. Because, so if you don't know the story, it's where the animals, there's a farmer, the animals overthrow the farmer, and eventually the animals make their own rules, it's their own farm, and you have the pigs, and they're starting to do these things as humans are doing, and they end up betraying the animals for the pigs' benefit. And they end up being a dictatorship, and, well, it's not even really a dictatorship, it's just them acting as humans when they overthrew the humans. They were hypocrites. But that's not uh, that wouldn't be anti-communism. That would be pro-communism. And or you could even make the statement that, well, it's just telling a story. So it is definitely not anti anything. It's telling you what's going on. For other people, that would be instructions. They took down a capitalist, the former, and they build their form, they collectivize, and they collectivize capitalism. And that would be communism. So, and I've heard people say, well, that they say things like, conservatives say things like, well, it's the irony of a progressive wanting communism and all this is that if they were artists or whatever and they wrote books and all this and movies, then they wouldn't be able to do that because it would be communism and they didn't allow the Soviet Union. Yet ironically of their irony would be we still got Animal Farm. And in fact, Animal Farm was banned in the Soviet Union because it was seen as anti-communism. So it was banned in the Soviet Union. But again, if it's anti, it can equally be pro. So they were selling this idea to the Americans, and even it, and here's the thing: if someone doesn't know what about that ban, then people would say, well, this has to be anti-communism because we're getting this knowledge of it, and all this. It's making us aware. Knowledge is neither anti or pro. It's neutral. It depends on how you do, what's your interpretation and what you do with it. So, one person's anti could be someone else's instructions, to take over something. It's kind of like the tree of knowledge. Some say it as the tree of good and evil. But knowledge is neither good nor evil. It's how you use it. And humans just haven't. When it comes to knowledge, we typically don't know the full story. But here's the thing. When conservatives, even if they don't know about that ban, they will say, well, this is anti-communism. And then they read about that ban and say, oh, that confirms that this is anti-communism. When in actual, philosophically speaking, it would be neither or. That was just a narrative. That was a rhetoric of that. So you gotta be very careful. Animal Farm is a good thing if you see it in that lens. Very philosophical from multiple angles. But you can't see it telling one thing anti-pro and all that. You gotta see it from the bigger picture perspective. And that's why I think that in this one, I'm really interested in seeing how they convey that message. I'm thinking that it's probably going to be less ambiguous than previous ones. Imagine this. You have to think about when Orwell wrote the book. It was done in the Soviet Union. So from that perspective, he could only allude to things without being straight up. So people would say, in the Soviet Union, they say, well, this is pro-communism. Or people would say, well, this is anti-communism, and they would have that division. So the government would say, well, it's anti-communism, so we got to ban it. See, that takes care of the problem. And so then you also had the CIA get involved with Animal Farm. It said that they funded the original cartoon version and the 1999 version. So what message are they conveying? So this one could also be, at this point, maybe, given Bonhoeffer and all this, I'm starting to think. I don't know. I'm starting to think that Angel Studios may be a front for the CIA. I'm just saying that. I don't know for sure. But given how they do historical things, and it's some things that people don't always know, and the way they market things, it makes me believe that that is possible. But including the Chosen, they choose these things that although I don't think they produced the Chosen. I think they were just a distributor of it. Yeah, it was a distributor. It says it's a distributor here. They didn't produce it. But they did produce. Okay, Wires Pistols. Due to prior agreements, the production team has separated from the distributor. Right, so they didn't. So they can produce things, but they didn't distribute. So that's very interesting. I don't know. That would be like Netflix, but or even Amazon. Amazon has originals as well, but I think that this one may. And here's the thing about that regarding the ambiguity, less ambiguity. This would tell the story better than the original because he was limited to what he could tell. Like I was saying, alluding to things that was going on. So this might be more. If you do that, if that's true, it'd be a masterpiece. But of course, if it was the more woke version, and it was actually pro-communism, then of course it would be more woke and anti-conservative, because conservatives spun it to mean something where it didn't even have any meaning to begin with. I'm very cautious about, if we look at George Orwell. I also watched 1984. Didn't read the book, but I did. But anyways, 1984 was another popular one that he did. Those two was most popular. So you have to be very careful about reading the history of Orwell. Because, let me see if I can find an example of this. My thing about 1984 when I said banned book, I believe it was Animal Farm as well. I mean, so this is what you want to be careful of. So it says George Orwell was a committed democratic socialist and fierce critic of totalitarianism, particularly Stalinism, throughout his life. He believed in social equality, economic justice, and individual freedom, advocating for a humane form of socialism that rejected centralized authoritarian control. His work championed intellectual honesty, objectivity, and truth. Here's why you have to be careful about that. Because we don't know who he actually was. He's never given out information about himself. He died. When did he die? He died a long, long time ago, before the Soviet Union was collapsed. So we don't know what is truth about what he would actually say, what his views were. We're just giving an interpretation based on our filters and lens as Americans. That's very dangerous to get into. The only thing you can go on is what are the stories telling? Like, what are different interpretations they could be? It's very philosophical. You could get away with that in the Soviet Union. If you're philosophical, you could speak your mind as long as you weren't being direct. Because if people could differentiate different things about what you were actually saying, they could say plausible deniability, and that would be your main thing. that you could bypass. I will agree his work champion and intellectual honesty, objectivity, and truth. I will say that. But him as a man, don't go that way. Because you don't know who's writing it, you don't know where the information came from, and you don't know. It's not about what you know. It's not about what you know. It's about what you don't know. You can twist what he said. You can twist it all. Go by the interpretations and what multiple interpretations could be made from his movies and his works. That would be the most honest thing to do. Especially when you're talking about democracy. You just gotta be very careful about that kind of stuff. Conservatives say that they're on his side, but under the twisting of words too, he could also be seen as a liberal. He was very, you gotta be very careful, very careful. Why can't I go Why can't I go forward? Crazy. So I'm very interested in seeing this movie. Again, based on the context and what we know, satirical sound like irony to me. But that's why we watch Animal Farm, is because of the messaging. What else did I want to say? Now people would argue, well, if it was a CIA project, actually, let me check something. Yes, Animal Farm was strictly banned in the USSR from its publication in 1945 until the late 1980s. As a direct allegory criticizing Stalinism and the Soviet regime, it was considered counter-revolutionary and defamatory to Soviet leadership, particularly Joseph Stalin. That's an interpretation. It was only allowed publication in the Soviet Union during the liberalization glasnost period of the late 1980s. Soviet authorities deemed it anti-communist and dangerous to the state because it depicted the betrayal of the 1917 revolution. Again, that's interpretation. But at the end of the day, the pigs did take over, and I don't believe there was an overthrow at the end. So it's more pro than anti. There's nothing anti. It's telling you something. If it was anti anything, it wouldn't exist. Because you have to think about the culture at the time. If you were born in that culture and grew up, you may disagree with it, but you wouldn't actively be totally against. Because you don't have any recognition of that. You don't know what's on the outside. You just be writing from that perspective while being careful not to be too direct. If you know what I know. So it's a distribution. Despite the ban, the CIA funded an animated film version in the 1950s to stir up debate. Pro and anti, Exactly what I just said. And the book is sometimes smuggled into the country. Stellet states the book was also banned in other Eastern Bloc countries such as East Germany until the fall of the Berlin Wall. Animal Farm was not just banned in the USSR, it was also forbidden in other communist countries like Cuba and China. And I believe at one point it was also banned in the United States. Let me make sure of that. At least at one point, I think. Localized bans. 1987, the book was banned in Bay County, Florida schools, but this decision was reversed following a lawsuit. It is often challenged for content deemed communist or for dirty references, sometimes by groups misinterpreting the criticism of. That's what I'm saying, guys. I said this. What looks anti to someone could be pro to someone else. Sometimes my groups misinterpret, and they say that's a misinterpretation. See, they want you to believe that's a misinterpretation. See, you see how this goes? But it's not interpretation because, again, philosophically, if something's anti, something's pro. That's why you gotta be very careful when you read about George Orwell. CIA involvement. In the twist, the CIA actually funded a 1954 animated film adaptation to support its anti-communist message, making it the opposite of a banned book at the federal level. Again, you just gotta. It's not critical thinking. It's not about having more knowledge. It's about how can other people. It's a good thing to debate. It's a good thing to debate. It's philosophical. It's a good thing to exchange notes on, but it's definitely not anti-communist. It says international status. Unlike the U.S., animal farm was historically banned in the Soviet Union and still banned in places like Cuba, North Korea, and the UAE. The United Arab Emirates. While it has appeared on a list of problem books throughout the years, Animal Farm is recognized in the U.S. as a classic of political satire. That's how they market this. Often used in high school curricula. I know that it was required reading many years ago. I had first heard of Animal Farm. I believe it would have been my dad when I was in high school, but we didn't have that required reading when I was in high school. But it was banned by the Soviets, promoted by the CIA. Again, going with that anti-communist message. But if it's going for a less ambiguous, it could still be funded by the CIA, but they're trying to switch it over, which would be different than what the conservatives would say it would be. So they would call it woke, because of course it would be woke. So I'm trying to reiterate this fact in different ways. I know I'm saying the same thing over and over, but I'm really trying to say it from different perspectives and different angles. See, it said that one, but then it says these two. It is a Bureau orator propaganda, became himself a propaganda tour during the Cold War, and that two of his films adaptations were funded by CIA, which would be the 1954 version and the 1999 version. Again, I didn't see the 1991. That's a live action. It says produced by Angel Studio. I would think that's more realistic. Again, going back, I would say it's more realistic than previous versions. It was like, it's an interpretation, but it's like if George Orwell was still alive, what would he really make this out to be? And I would definitely see that probably, like this guy, whoever directed this, people who wrote it, I imagine there will also be foreigners. They would see it in the eye that George Orwell would have originally created if he could say what he could say. I've also heard that it's been changed because of people would make the connection that it's reflective of modern day United States. So, like I said, that's what Animal Farm is all about. I mean, you're not watching the animals, you're watching the messaging. And that's what I'm interested in. You know, I'm not a philosopher. I don't want to be seen as one. That's not what I do, but it is something I do like to convey to people, and it's allows me to communicate people ideas and things. So Animal Farm, I like Animal Farm. It should be a universal thing that people should just watch. And I'm sure that there are many people like that. I'm not saying it from a political or philosophical view or American field of view. It allows you to see multiple perspectives. Anti-pro, like I said. What is actually sort of being told here. It says America has challenged Animal Farm due to political content. Like I said, we do have. I was reading from here. America has challenged political content. People have that lens of politics. It's a downfall of our country. Unfortunately, we put this lens on everybody, and we see ourselves as more powerful. But yet, everything gets filtered through a political lens, and it just becomes a mess. The left eats it up, and it's not that good of a system. I mean, I mentioned this. I was thinking about making this a separate video, but I want to bring this up. I was talking to someone who proclaims themselves as being on the left, as a leftist. We were talking about the federal government we were talking about the United States government following the federal government being the reason for it, the CIA, all of. They agreed on all of that. The airport, the post-Civil War Union, all of this. And they said that the United States would fall. And we agreed on everything. But at the end, I don't know why. I don't know why. I can't figure this out. At the end of it all, they started disagreeing because they said, well, I'm going to fight for America, for the United States. I'm like, you just agreed. After everything we talked about, that the United States was going to fall. And you want to defend that when you know it's going to fall. Like, why would you be a casualty? That makes no logical sense. You were saying everything against the United States, and you want to defend it, and you say, well, politics exists. I am sorry, but you are a moron. Leftists are morons if they believe that. I have never heard something so stupid. I don't have a problem with leftists. And I know the conservatives and all that, they say, but that has to be the stupidest thing I've ever heard. How can you defend something when you know it's going to fall? You're just going to be a casualty. And they said, well, it was because they needed politics. I'm like, politics is the reason we got in this situation. Politics is the reason other countries don't like us, because of our politics placed on other people, how we see other things, how we put our decisions and politics on other countries. And you know this. You would know this. And you want to defend it with... I don't know. I'm dumbfounded by that. I was like, what do you say to that? Feel free to put in the comments what they meant by that, because, like, what logic did you just jump? You said that everything was going to get destroyed. Everything was going to change. But then you say you want to defend the United States with politics. And you know that that's the problem. Like, my mind can't even... My mind can't even... It makes sense to somebody. Anyways. I don't understand. I don't get it. I don't get it. So yeah. So yeah, I'm interested in seeing this movie. I'm interested in seeing any Animal Farm, but if I don't think we've seen, I think the last one, like I said, I think the first two were the last ones. But let's see how many. Three major ones. Yeah. So they had 1954, 1999 live action. Haven't seen it, and then there's this new one coming out May 1st. So there's three. So yeah, the first two were CAA projects, well funded. Uh, a Hallmark television movie featuring animatronics from Jim Henson's Creature Shop. An animated feature film as part of the Cold War Culture Offensive. But they're just playing that same one. So I'm hoping that this 2026 one is more realistic, more. Again, I would say that it's probably most likely, again, funded by the CAA, some form or fashion, and I would say that it's probably more real, more true to what Orwell wanted to convey. But yeah. So yeah, I'll end it here. I'm sorry for taking 40 minutes on this, but But yeah, guys, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.